This is net worth by decade of age bracket. As you get older, you get better at your job, you get raises, your income goes up. But the real magic happens when you turn 50. Because when you turn 50, your single biggest expense, your last kid, leaves home and becomes someone else's problem. The money that you save because your last kid is gone, you put towards your second biggest expense, which is your house. And on average, you will have paid that down by the time you're 55. So age 55 to 65, your expenses are under control, your income is continuing to rise, this is the wealthiest you will ever be. And the money that you invest to prepare for your retirement in that 10-year age bracket, that is what it's all about. That is 70% of global private capital. That is literally the money that makes the world move. And normally, this doesn't matter at all, because normally we have a demographic structure that looks like this. You're looking at a standard pyramid. Children at the bottom, young adults, mature adults, retirees at the top, men on one side, women on the other. This is a nearly pre-industrial structure. This is Nigeria. And you'll notice that thin sliver at the top, that's 65, is tiny. It doesn't really matter what they do. And then there's more people age 64 below that, and 63 below that. And we've more or less had some version of this demographic now for 4,000 years of recorded history, until 1945. Because in 1945, the Americans changed the way the world worked.
Do you aspire to work in the United States of America? Well, don't worry if you're not a computer science engineer.
Minds Now has cracked the puzzle for finance and accounting folks to work in the US for 3 years.
How's that possible? Simple.
That the cost of capital in the United States, because of just this factor, has to go up by at least a factor of 5, independent of anything the Federal Reserve does. The fact that there's an economic turning and an inflation fight, that's just bad timing.
Whether you're looking at relocating to the US or Canada to work with a big 4 or multinational company,
they're also the single largest worker group we've ever had, and on average, they retire right now. There's a lot of things going on with inflation. I'm not going to try to talk you out of food inflation or energy inflation. These are real things. They matter. But labor inflation is by far the biggest one. Now, the next people down are my generation, Gen X. And when Gen X looks up at the boomers, our primary feeling is utter and complete disrespect and disgust. The way that the boomers treat family, we don't like at all. And it has to do with the numbers. When the boomers entered the workforce in the mid-60s to the early 80s, there were so many of them that they pushed down the cost of labor. They competed with one another. This is one of the reasons why the boomer generation has a reputation for being so physically mobile. They had to go to wherever the job was. It got so bad that a lot of boomer families put the second spouse into the workforce in order to make ends meet, which only pushed down the cost of labor even more. That's the primary reason why boomers have the highest divorce rate in American history. And Gen X looks at that like, no, we are not doing that. We value our time at least as much as our money, and we are going to be single income earners for households. And as a result, our marriage rates are much more durable. But wow, have we paid for that? Because there are 800 gajillion boomers and like 14 Xers, and we have been the low men and women on the totem pole our entire professional careers. And we have seen the lowest rates of recompense gains, the lowest raise rates in American history until now, because all those boomers are going away. And even if we all wanted to work, there were never going to be enough of us in the first place to fill all those shoes. And so now we are seeing the highest raises of any demographic in American history. And this has at least another 10 years to run. Gen X, our time has finally arrived. And the rest of you know that as labor inflation, but you can suck it. All right, the Zoomers, new kids on the block. The single most important thing to remember about the Zoomers is that they are not millennials. Millennials were raised by the boomers. They were raised and they were told that they were special and that you should do whatever you want. You should go get that art history degree. We're not going to keep track of the score at the soccer games. You can live in the basement as long as you want. You be you. As a result, they have a very high self-confidence. They're very good in group situations. They're great managers. They're great team players. They're collaborative. They're cooperative. All positive points that are backed up by the data very firmly.
All set to work in the US.
It used to be that if you had iron ore and coal and oil and food, you could make something of yourself. You could expand into empire. But if you lacked one of those 4 things, you were probably a colony. But the empires died in World War II. And the Americans created this thing we know as globalization. We used our Navy to patrol the seas so that anyone could go anywhere at any time and interface with any economic partner. And suddenly you didn't need those 4 things. You only needed one of them. And you could trade for the other 3. And we all started to industrialize together. Not from the same starting point, not at the same pace, but for the first time, all of humanity was on the same road. And that changed national economics. Because as you industrialize, people move off the farm and into the cities to take industrial jobs, which means personal economics changed. Because when you live on the farm, kids are free labor. You have as many as you can put up with. But when you live in an urban condo, kids are not free labor. They're very expensive, very dirty, very loud, very annoying pieces of mobile furniture. And adults are not stupid, so we had fewer of them. And 75 years on, this is what our demographics look like today. The baby boomers are the largest generation we've ever had. On average, they turn 65 this quarter. We are there. We've always known that this was coming since the 1960s. Think about what this means for finance. Single largest financial population we've ever had is moving into mass retirement. When you retire, you liquidate your stocks and your bonds, you go into T-bills and cash. Because if there's a currency crisis or a market crash, you lose everything. You no longer have the income to recover. You have to go conservative. This is perfectly normal. And it has never mattered until now. Because now the largest generation ever is liquidating everything all at the same time. We have always known between January of last year and December of next year. Zoomers were raised by this guy's generation. We told them that you will never have Medicaid or Social Security because the boomers are going to suck that dry. You can't rely on anyone. You've got to be better. Not better than the millennials. That's easy. Better than everyone. You got to work hard. You've got to sacrifice. And you have to realize that the world is going to do you no favors. So, to that end, we're going to keep track of the score at the soccer game. We're going to write it down in this little book. We're going to read it to you every night. Your backup college is going to be Harvard. And when you turn 17 and a half, get the hell out of my house. They're hardworking, almost pathologically so. They're loyal. They're creative. But they're antisocial. They don't trust anyone. They do not work well with others. And their dream job is to work coding in the dark in a closet that locks from the inside. They never want to meet you. They're also the smallest generation we've ever had. Between the large boomers leaving and the small zoomers coming in, we have a shortage this calendar year of 400,000 workers nationally. And we know what the inflow and the outflow from the labor market is because they're all here already. It's going to increase that shortage every year for the next 12 until it peaks in 2030-40 at an annual shortage of about 900,000. Hardwired in. Now, there's the millennials. We've talked about some of the positive attributes. It's only fair to cover some of the negative. Narcissistic, self-absorbed, arrogant, needy, still live at home, show up to work at the crack of Tuesday at noon for their first hour of work. The data supports this too. It really does, for half of them. The other half have always done everything that we have always demanded. They graduated from college a semester early. They didn't go to Europe for a decade to find themselves. They went straight into the workforce. And because of it, they got screwed. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, they were the last ones in the door, so they were first ones kicked out. Whether it's because the millennials did everything right or everything wrong, they missed out on 5 years on average of work experience in their 20s. Formative years they will never recover. They will always be behind. They are the least skilled worker cadre we have ever had for their age bracket. And they will be behind until the day they retire. And yet, the hope is still with them. Because they're a large generation. A large generation generates a large generation. The boomers generated, the millennials will generate whatever comes next. Which means, in 10 years, when the millennials are entering their 50s and having their midlife crises, I can't wait for that, they will enter that investment-rich cadre that my generation cannot be because there aren't enough of us. And capital costs will start coming down finally. But more importantly, when their kids grow up, large generation generates a large generation. When those kids grow up, get trained into the workforce in the 2040s, we will finally get back to a labor structure that looks like what we remember from 2019. All we have to do is wait 20 years. This will fix itself. So if you're going to take any advice from me today, hire and borrow, hire and borrow, hire and borrow, hire and borrow, hire and borrow. The hiring situation is the best it will be for 20 years. The financial system is the cheapest it will be for 10. Do it now. Don't wait 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or 90 months. You have a decade or more to wait before conditions normalize.